Kofi Adeyemi stood before the living room mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. The fabric was expensive, Ama's insistence, but it still felt too tight around his neck, as though it knew something he didn't. From the kitchen drifted the soft hum of birthday music, an old high-life tune Ama loved, its warmth settling into the walls of the house like incense. Behind him, his twin sons wrestled on the carpet, their limbs a blur of elbows and knees. One pinned the other, triumphant laughter ringing out before they collapsed together in breathless giggles. The sound filled the room with life, with proof that Kofi had built something solid, something lasting. He caught their reflection by accident. Two identical faces stared back from the mirror, bright, sharp, undeniably beautiful, and wrong. Their noses were slimmer than his, more sculpted, their eyes lighter, catching the morning sun in a way his never had. Kofi felt a sudden tightening in his chest, a brief, unwelcome pressure that made him inhale sharply. It was nothing, he told himself. Children changed. Genetics played tricks. His mother had once said blood could skip generations like a mischievous child. Still the mirror lingered. For a moment too long, he searched his own face for echoes of himself in theirs, tracing the lines of his jaw, the curve of his brow. The answers did not come. Instead, a question formed. Small, treacherous, and entirely uninvited. He turned away abruptly, straightening his jacket as if the mirror had insulted him. A man did not question his blood. Not in his culture, not in his house, not on the morning of his 50th birthday. Ama appeared in the doorway just then, radiant in a neatly pressed dress, her smile easy and assured. She wished him long life, kissed his cheek, adjusted his collar with familiar hands. Kofi smiled back, burying the moment deep inside himself, where doubt had no name and no voice. The music swelled. The children laughed again. The mirror fell silent. Ama moved through the house with effortless grace, her steps measured, her posture flawless. Everything about her spoke of discipline. Her toned arms, her carefully styled hair, the way her voice never rose too high or dropped too low. At church, women praised her openly. "You are blessed," they said. "Teach us your ways." Men respected her boundaries, addressing her with careful politeness, their admiration wrapped in restraint. Ama accepted it all with a calm smile, the kind that suggested fulfillment without ever revealing too much. Kofi trusted her completely. How could he not? She managed the home with precision, raised their sons with intention, stood beside him in public like a testament to his success. The marriage looked perfect on paper. Faithful, stable, admired. What Kofi didn't see were the moments when Ama stood alone in the kitchen, long after the dishes were done, hands resting on the counter as she stared into the darkened window. The reflection that stared back at her felt distant, almost unfamiliar. Sometimes in the quiet, she wondered when her life had hardened into routine, when love had become responsibility, when choices had narrowed so subtly that she hadn't noticed the door closing behind her. At night, lying beside Kofi's steady breathing, Ama stared at the ceiling and counted the slow rotations of the fan. Her thoughts drifted to places she rarely allowed herself to go, not out of regret exactly, but caution. Some memories demanded silence to survive. Some truths once spoken could never be returned to their original shape. She turned on her side, facing away from her husband, her expression calm even in the dark. On paper, everything was perfect. On paper, nothing was wrong. The gym on Victoria Island smelled of iron, citrus cleaner, and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lagoon, sunlight bouncing off the water and spilling across treadmills and free weights. It was here, among mirrors and motion, that Ama felt visible again, not as a wife, not as a mother, not as a symbol of discipline, but as a body in its own right. She came in the late mornings after the boys were at school and the house had settled into silence. In fitted workout clothes, hair pulled back, she moved with quiet precision. Her form was flawless, a memory preserved in muscle. She had once been an athlete, long before marriage reshaped her life into something smaller and safer. When Ethan Cole arrived, people noticed. He was foreign in a way that drew glances without effort. Tall, relaxed, his confidence unforced. He spoke with an accent that didn't rush or apologize. As a new consultant on a short-term contract, he treated Lagos like a place to be understood, not conquered. He observed more than he spoke, and when he spoke, it was with intent. He noticed Amma the first week, not the way men usually did. His gaze lingered on her movement, not her body, on her discipline, not her appearance. "You still move like an athlete," he said one morning, handing her a towel after she finished a set. The words startled her. She paused, breathing hard, sweat cooling on her skin. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She smiled politely at first, then more openly when he didn't push, didn't stare. Their interactions became small, consistent moments. Shared equipment, nods of acknowledgement, brief exchanges about routines. It felt safe, professional, controlled. And yet each time she left the gym, Amma felt lighter, as though something in her had been seen and gently named. Conversations grew longer without either of them noticing when that happened. What began as talk of form and endurance drifted toward travel, then toward ambition. Ethan spoke of cities he had lived in and left behind. Amma spoke of dreams she once had, carefully phrased, as if testing how much truth the air could hold. From dreams, they moved, almost inevitably, to regrets. Amma told herself she deserved to be heard. She had earned this small rebellion, words spoken without correction, thoughts offered without being weighed for propriety. Ethan told himself he was just being kind, that listening was not a crime. But kindness lingered. Listening became recognition. Their laughter softened. Their silences grew comfortable. There were pauses now that felt charged, moments when neither rushed to fill the space. The line appeared gradually, faint and easy to step over if one wasn't looking. When it was crossed, there was no dramatic moment to mark it, no declarations, no promises. Just a hand that stayed too long. A look that asked a question neither wanted, answered out loud. Afterward, they said nothing about it. Silence became the agreement, the only thing that made it bearable. Words would have demanded decisions. Silence allowed the illusion of control, the pretense that nothing had truly changed. Amma returned home that evening, moved through her routines with practiced ease. Kofi didn't notice anything different. The children laughed. Dinner was served. And yet, somewhere deep within her, a line had been crossed that could never be redrawn. The pregnancy test trembled in Amma's hand, the thin plastic suddenly heavier than it should have been. Two lines stared back at her, clear, undeniable. Her chest tightened and her heartbeat leapt violently against her ribcage, not with joy, not with relief. This was terror, sharp and immediate, spreading through her like cold water poured down her spine. She felt as though the room itself had grown smaller, pressing in, watching her falter. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, elbows pressed into her knees, head bowed. Breathing carefully, she felt the uneven rhythm of her pulse, as if the truth itself could hear her thoughts. Weeks, days, fleeting glances in the mirror, everything replayed with cruel precision. She saw Ethan's face, the quiet moments of laughter and shared confidences, the small, unspoken proximity that had grown into something undeniable. There was no room for doubt, none at all. Her fingers pressed the test against her palm until it left a faint imprint in the skin, a small mark she would later hide beneath folded towels. She wrapped herself in the ritual of domesticity, hiding evidence with the practiced motions of someone who had spent a lifetime performing perfection. When she finally stepped into the shower, the water ran hot, but it failed to thaw the chill in her chest. The steam did not touch the icy knot of fear lodged deep inside her. She prayed, not for forgiveness, but for simplicity, for a path forward that did not require dismantling everything she had built, her life, her marriage, her carefully cultivated identity. When she told Kofi, she chose her words with precision, rehearsing the lines until they felt plausible. "I'm pregnant." He froze for a heartbeat, eyes wide, as if the words had startled him from their ordinary orbit. Then he laughed, a sound so full it seemed to vibrate through the walls, startling in its joy. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her with a triumphant energy that left her breathless. His voice rose, thanking God aloud, reverberating as though the ceiling itself could carry his gratitude into the heavens. Amma laughed too, though it came out thin and tremulous. Then tears filled her eyes, blurring the room, blurring the lie until it almost began to feel like truth. She pressed herself into his chest, letting herself be held, letting the warmth of his faith and love suffocate the cold terror knotting her insides. She told herself the lie would end there. One lie, small enough to carry, carefully measured, necessary, protective. She told herself many things, that she could contain it, that it would not matter in the long run, that her family would remain untouched by shadows she had conjured. But a quiet, persistent voice at the back of her mind whispered that lies had a way of rooting themselves deep, of growing in the dark until they could no longer be contained. The twins arrived under a sky brushed with gold, to the sound of drums and the steady murmur of women who knew exactly what to do. The house had transformed into a shrine of expectation and ceremony. Incense curled in lazy spirals through the air, mingling with the warm scent of palm oil and sweet smoke. Ancestors were invoked, blessings spoken aloud, voices rolling in rhythms older than the walls themselves. Outside, neighbors gathered, curiosity and celebration coiling in the heat of the day. Inside, tradition took over completely, leaving no space for doubt, no room for private truths. 2 boys, strong lungs, strong grips, tiny fists that clench with instinctive power, signaling life and will already present in their first moments. They were given ancestral names, Kojo and Kwame, names that tethered them firmly to Kofi's lineage, each syllable carrying history, expectation, and the weight of family honor. Elders nodded in approval, their eyes shimmering with a mixture of pride and recognition. This was balance. This was favor. This was the affirmation of continuity, the sacred right of bloodlines preserved. Kofi held them like fragile treasures, marveling at the perfection of small limbs and soft skin. He whispered promises meant only for them, protection, guidance, a future rooted in honor. Fingers tracing tiny features he searched for himself, found just enough, and felt satisfied. The world narrowed to him, the boys and the weight of tradition, a triangle of devotion that left no cracks. Amma watched from the bed, her body spent, her mind swirling. Exhaustion weighed down her limbs, but the heaviness in her heart could not be soothed with rest. She saw what love could do, how it could bury truth beneath ritual and joy, how tradition could seal something false so tightly that even she began to doubt her own memory of the line that had been crossed. As Kofi smiled down at his sons, whispering promises into their tiny ears, Amma felt a cold clarity settle over her. The truth was already gone. Not erased, but buried, wrapped in celebration, in names, in love too sincere to challenge. The lie had grown roots, invisible yet strong, feeding on devotion, ceremony, and her silence. She pressed her hand over her heart and whispered a single, tremulous word. How long? Because she knew it would not stay alone. Not for long. Years later, Ethan Cole's phone vibrated with the idle hum of notifications as he scrolled aimlessly through his feed, half-heartedly liking photos he barely remembered taking. The morning light spilled lazily through the blinds, dust motes drifting in the gold of Lego sunlight. Then something stopped him, like a cold hand clutching his chest. A photograph. 2 boys. At first he stared without recognition, thinking it must be a trick of light, a lens flare, or some cruel trick of coincidence. But the grin, oh, that grin, curled across both faces, like a signature he had known intimately, a smile from memory, not imagination. And the eyes? Those same golden brown eyes he had traced in mirrors for years, the ones that haunted him every morning, the ones he sometimes thought were carved into his dreams. Impossible. He whispered it aloud, though no one heard. His pulse pounded in his ears, faster than thought, loud enough to drown out the faint street noise below. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, the coffee cooling beside him irrelevant. Hands trembling, he typed her name, Amma Adeyemi, into the search bar. His fingers hovered, as if touching the keys might somehow change what he already knew, before pressing enter. Images loaded in fragments, Amma, poised, elegant, radiant, A woman who belonged firmly to her world, surrounded by family, children in arms, children laughing. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, met his through the lens of distance, and a shiver ran down his spine. The universe, he realized, had folded itself cruelly, creating coincidences so precise that they seemed deliberate. Ethan's mind raced. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every brush of hands at the gym replayed in unbearable clarity. And now proof stared back at him from a screen, a truth he could neither deny nor ignore. "Impossible," he repeated again, though his hands shook with a tremor that seemed to come from bone and marrow. The message typed itself before he even realized. "Amma, I see them. I see everything." His thumb hovered over the send button, frozen between hesitation and necessity. His chest ached, his vision blurred. And then, as if drawn by fate itself, he pressed send. Amma's phone buzzed with a vibration that seemed louder than usual, a drumbeat in her chest. She saw the name and froze. Ethan. Her thumb hovered over the notification, a heartbeat of hesitation, a silent weighing of consequences. She opened the message, 4 words, but they carried weight that made her chest tighten. "I see them. I see everything." Her pulse stuttered. Fear, dread, the sharp taste of panic filled her mouth. Then almost immediately, a practiced composure settled over her like armor. Years of discipline, of masking desire, of controlling chaos converged into a single act of control. She read it once, then twice. Her hands pressed the phone to her chest. A tremor ran through her fingers, but she steadied herself. Calm, composed, controlled. Without a word, she blocked him. Every platform, every number, every digital window into his world disappeared with deliberate precision. She deleted memories, wiped threads, erased evidence, excised the temptation to feel exposed. Then she moved further, outward. She joined another church, louder in praise, more visible in faith. She became a stricter mother, sharper in discipline, stricter in expectation. She became a wife who questioned less, who commanded more, who orchestrated her household so tightly that curiosity and doubt had no room to breathe. Yet guilt does not vanish, it does not sleep, it waits, quietly, patiently, in corners of the mind, in the spaces between thought and memory, in dreams that arrive unbidden, in the hum of silence at night. It reminds you, it watches, it whispers. Amma lay awake that night, listening to the steady breathing of Kofi, the soft snores of her sons in the next room. She pressed a hand to her chest and felt the lie pulse like a hidden heartbeat beneath her ribs. She repeated the truths she had told herself, the rules she had enforced, the boundaries she had drawn, the careful structures of home and marriage. She told herself she had protected her family. She told herself she had survived. But beneath it all, in the hollow warmth of her chest, the echo of inevitability beat quietly. Silence is a choice, and choices have consequences. Somewhere, far away, a voice had already pierced that silence, and Amma knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the roots of the lies she had nurtured so carefully were stirring, and they would not remain hidden for long. The sun was high over the playground, at Victoria Island International, casting long shadows across the grass. Parents crowded the bleachers, cheering, clapping, and waving at the young athletes as they sprinted, jumped, and tumbled across the track. Kofi sat with Amma on the edge of the grandstand, proud and smiling, the twins bouncing with uncontainable energy as they raced toward the finish line. And then a parent, a jovial man with 2 wide sunglasses, leaned over and laughed, loud enough for Kofi to hear. "Those boys didn't inherit your face at all, Kofi." The comment landed like a pebble tossed into still water, sending ripples Kofi couldn't quite contain. He laughed politely, the smile tight around his mouth, nodding as though it were a joke, as though it were harmless. But inside, a small fissure had opened, one he could not patch with ceremony or reason. That night at home, Kofi found himself alone in the study. The house was quiet, the twins asleep, Amma's soft breathing steady beside him. He opened the old photo albums he had kept since the boys were born. Pictures of newborns, swaddled in blankets, photographs of their first steps, First birthdays, school recitals. He compared their eyes to his own, their noses, their smiles, the curve of their jaws. The measurements were obsessive, ridiculous, yet the unease grew with each page he turned. The laughter of the parent at the sports day echoed in his mind, insidious, unrelenting. Doubt curled like smoke around his thoughts. Every resemblance he had taken for granted now seemed like a coincidence too precise to ignore. Every memory was a riddle he could not solve. That night, Kofi lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the old house settling. The world outside continued in careless motion. Inside, a storm brewed. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and polished wood, a clean, clinical odor that should have reassured him but only amplified his anxiety. The walls were lined with certificates and photos of smiling families, evidence of normalcy he no longer felt part of. The nurse handed him a folder, the twins' blood samples, Amma seated beside him, quiet and still. Kofi tried to focus, tried to hear the reassurance that should have been present in such a routine procedure. When the doctor entered, her brow was furrowed, her expression gentle but serious. She sat across from him, fingers lightly clasped over the desk. "It's unusual," she said. Those words sank into him like stones in a river. Unusual. A word that carried the weight of doubt, of suspicion, of all the questions he had tried to avoid. Kofi's ears rang, the world narrowed, the walls, the floor, the sterile smell, all of it melted away until only one thought remained, stark and unrelenting. What if I am not their father? Time slowed, seconds stretching into an unbearable eternity. He glanced at Amma, her eyes calm, unreadable, her hands folded neatly on her lap. The woman he had trusted completely, whose life had been intertwined with his own, now seemed like a stranger whose secrets hovered between them. The doctor continued speaking, but he heard nothing. Her words floated in the air, incomprehensible, irrelevant. The numbers on the blood test, the probabilities, the genetics, none of it mattered. What mattered was the gnawing terror, the silent accusation of possibility. These children are not mine. Kofi's hands gripped the edge of the desk. The world as he had known it, the family he had cherished, the life he had built, was teetering on the edge of a chasm he could not yet see the bottom of. He wanted to shout, to demand the truth, to tear down walls, uncover secrets, reclaim certainty. But all that remained was the heavy, oppressive silence of a question that could not yet be answered. And for the first time in his life, Kofi Adeyemi felt completely, terrifyingly alone. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. The twins slept soundly, exhausted from another day of school and play. Amma moved through the kitchen, clearing the remnants of dinner with her usual efficiency. Kofi lingered in the doorway, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above filling the space between them. He had rehearsed the question all day. The words weighed heavily on his tongue, dangerous in their simplicity. Finally he spoke, his voice low, careful. "Amma, have you ever betrayed me?" The question hung in the air, trembling like a fragile crystal. It was not shouted. It did not demand an answer. But it carried the weight of every doubt, every suspicion, every sleepless night he had endured since the school incident and the blood tests. Amma's hand froze mid-motion. She turned toward him, eyes wide, lips parting. And then she spoke. Too fast, too rehearsed. "Never." The word was immediate, sharp, a blade of certainty. But Kofi heard it differently. He had expected hesitation, a pause, maybe even a flicker of shame. What he heard instead was rehearsed denial. Trust cracked, not shattered. His heart still clung to memory, to years of shared mornings and laughter, but enough to let doubt in. The sound of it, quiet and insidious, spread through him like a slow leak. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time noticed the faint tension at the corners of her mouth, the careful control in her posture. The room seemed colder. Shadows from the ceiling fan swept across the walls. Doubt had a sound. It had a smell. It had settled between them like a visitor that refused to leave. Kofi did not speak again that night. He sat alone in the dark, listening to the house breathe, to the distant hum of life continuing, as if oblivious to the fracture that had begun. The envelope arrived the next morning, thick and official, the return address small and impersonal. Kofi picked it up from the table where Amma had left it, her trust in him implicit, unquestioned. He turned it over in his hands, weighing it, feeling the paper's weight, the promise and the danger it contained. He waited until the house was silent, the twins at school, Amma still in her morning prayers, before he opened it. The blade of the envelope's edge cut through the paper neatly, deliberately, as though slicing through years of assumption and security. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the print crisp and clinical, the language sterile but undeniable. He read it once, twice. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words hit him with the weight of inevitability, cold and precise. There was no error, no ambiguity, no room for hope. His children, the boys whose faces had haunted his reflection, whose laughter had once filled him with pride, were not his. He folded the paper carefully, reverently, almost ritualistically. It was sacred and dangerous, a truth so potent it could dismantle everything he had built. He held it against his chest, the edges pressing into his skin, as if the paper could somehow absorb his grief, his shock, his rising anger. Every memory of the boys, their first steps, their tiny hands grasping his fingers, their laughter echoing in the house, suddenly carried a new weight. Every moment felt like a betrayal, every smile a reminder of a deception so deep that it had gone unnoticed for years. Kofi walked to the window. The city stretched below him, bright and indifferent. The traffic, the honking horns, the passing lives, all continued, unaware of the quiet devastation in this small apartment above the street. He pressed the folded paper against his forehead, inhaling sharply. The question that had once been theoretical now demanded an answer. How had this happened? And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath shock and disbelief, a darker thought took root, cold and relentless. Who is responsible? The envelope remained in his hands, silent and weighty, and Kofi knew the truth inside it could never be unseen. Kofi sat in his car long after the house had grown quiet. The city around him remained awake, lights flickering in distant buildings, street vendors calling out in the early hours, the hum of traffic like a persistent heartbeat. Inside the car, however, the world had shrunk to a single point of unbearable gravity. The envelope clutched in his hands. Memories replayed with cruel clarity. The twins' first steps, stumbling and triumphant, their tiny hands grasping his fingers, night fevers and whispered prayers, long vigils by their cribs, arms aching from holding them close, birthday mornings, scraped knees, laughter echoing through the hallways. Every ordinary miracle of fatherhood he had believed sacred. Were those moments now invalid? Or more real than blood? The thought gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. Years of devotion, of sleepless nights, and careful guidance, of love that had been pure and unquestioned. Could all of it be reduced to illusion because of a biological truth? He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. His chest ached. The question that had once seemed theoretical now tore at the edges of his soul. Who are they? And who have I been? Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, painting the sky in pale streaks of gold and pink. The city stirred to life, oblivious to the quiet collapse of a man within his own car. Kofi had never felt so unmade, so simultaneously hollow and full of anger, grief and disbelief. He turned the envelope over and over, tracing the sterile print of probability and denial with his fingertips. It was an object of power, a weapon, and a mirror reflecting a life he no longer recognized. And beneath it all, a dark, unspoken thought whispered relentlessly, "Everything you thought you knew is a lie." When Kofi finally confronted her, Amma collapsed. Not theatrically, but utterly, like the air had been pulled out of her lungs. She sank to the floor of the living room, hands pressed over her face, shaking. The words spilled from her in a torrent she could no longer control. The gym, Ethan, the mistake, the fear, the suffocating silence that had allowed years to pass unnoticed. She tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to make the unbearable bearable. Each sentence was a confession, a plea, and an apology rolled into one desperate breath. Kofi listened. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He did not pace or strike the walls with fists of anger. He simply stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word with a stillness that terrified her more than fury ever could. Amma's chest heaved. Tears streaked her cheeks. I didn't, she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of years of secrets. I was afraid of losing everything, of losing you, of losing them. Kofi's silence was an unspoken verdict. It did not absolve. It did not condemn. It was worse. It made her accountable to herself, forced her to confront the enormity of what she had done. Finally, she fell forward onto her knees, sobbing openly. I was weak. I was selfish. Enough, Kofi said quietly. His voice was calm, precise, not harsh, but not forgiving either. It was the sound of a man who had already measured the weight of betrayal and found it heavier than anything he could bear. Amma flinched, startled by the lack of anger, the absence of dramatic judgment. She had imagined yelling, accusations, rage, the storm of a husband scorned. But this stillness was sharper. It cut deeper, leaving her raw and exposed. You lied, Kofi said, almost conversationally. For years, and I trusted you. She nodded, unable to speak, the truth of it pressing her down. And in that quiet, devastating moment, Amma understood fully. Some betrayals do not end with words. They linger, shaping the air between two people, settling like dust that refuses to be brushed away. And Kofi was already changed, remade by knowledge she could never take back. The morning air in Victoria Island carried a sharp edge, even through the tinted windows of Kofi's car. He parked outside the gym where he had first met Amma years ago. The same place where laughter and weight plates had once been innocent, now seemed charged with memory and suspicion. Kofi stepped inside, moving deliberately, surveying the room with the meticulous attention of a man who had long studied everything he touched. He watched patrons lift, sprint, stretch, observe their form, their focus, the unconscious rhythms of bodies in motion. He spoke to staff with measured politeness, asking casual questions about training schedules, attendance, routines. Names came up, mentioned casually, a foreign consultant who had helped some of the members with personal training programs. Ethan. He wrote the name down, repeating it in his mind as if saying it aloud could make sense of the chaos it had caused. Ethan. The echoes of the past returned, sharp and invasive. Ethan's presence at the gym, once unnoticed, almost irrelevant, now loomed like a shadow over every memory. Kofi recalled the small smiles exchanged, the casual proximity, the unremarkable yet undeniable attention Amma had received. And suddenly, every picture in his mind from the twins' earliest days, their eyes, their smiles, the subtle shapes of their faces, seemed to trace back to this man. The realization was not sudden, but gradual, insidious, a slow tightening of a noose he could not cut. Kofi left the gym with a single thought, dominating every step. The past was not behind him. It had been lying in wait, patient, calculating, and now it had a name. Ethan had never known. He had lived with the half-memory of a mistake, a brief entanglement he had buried beneath distance and time. He had moved through life with guilt, with longing, with the ache of absence, but he had never known that the lives he had touched had grown into something permanent, that his reflection had become literal, living in the eyes of children he would never see. Kofi had always known. His love for his sons had never wavered, nor had his dedication, but beneath every smile, every bedtime story, every scraped knee kissed and fevered night held vigil over, there had been a shadow of doubt, a quiet terror waiting for confirmation. That envelope, the probability, the moments replayed. Kofi had carried the truth silently, painfully, knowing he could never unsee it. Now both men were trapped by the same truth, approaching it from opposite directions. Ethan, confronted by the undeniable, a past catching up like a tide, unable to undo what had already been done. Kofi, confronted by betrayal and biological reality, unable to retreat from what he had already embraced as his own. The tension between them was invisible yet palpable, a force that would not remain contained. The air between them, if it could ever meet, would crackle with accusation, guilt, and something heavier. Responsibility. Both men were fathers, but neither had been prepared for the collision that reality demanded. Kofi's hands tightened around the steering wheel of his car, parked just outside the gym. His thoughts turned not to revenge or accusation, but to calculation, to control, to understanding, to what he must do next. Ethan, somewhere far away, stared at a photograph on his phone, a smile frozen in time, unaware that it would soon become the axis upon which his entire world tilted. Both men, on opposite sides of a line drawn by secrecy and choice, were about to be forced into a reckoning neither could escape. The argument had been quiet at first, simmering under the surface like a slow boil. But Kojo had heard it, the sharp edge in his father's voice, the tightness in Amma's that didn't belong. He paused mid-Lego building, ears straining, heart-skipping beats he couldn't name. Across the room, Kwame noticed the sudden distance between his parents, the way their eyes avoided each other, the tense silence that replaced laughter and warmth. That evening, as Kofi tucked the twins into bed, their small faces pressed into the pillows, they spoke in hushed, tentative voices. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" Kojo asked, his brow furrowed, the innocence of 7 years pressing like glass against a secret too large for him to carry. Kwame's voice trembled, quieter, mirroring his brother's worry. "Why are you and Mummy angry?" Kofi felt a surge of protective love so fierce it bordered on pain. He gathered both boys into his arms, holding them tighter than he ever had before, willing himself to be enough, to shield them from a truth too heavy for small shoulders. "No, my loves," he whispered, voice low and trembling. "You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy loves you, always." But as he held them, a cold certainty crept into his chest. Words, no matter how carefully chosen, could not erase what they had begun to sense. Children had a way of feeling fractures. Adults tried to hide. Kofi knew that in the quiet of their minds, even now, suspicion and fear were planting seeds he could not uproot. He kissed the tops of their heads, and stayed there a long moment, clinging not just to them, but to the illusion of safety, the fragile thread of family he was desperate to keep intact. By the following week, the household had grown tense with whispers and half-spoken truths. News had leaked to elders, neighbors, and relatives. Not the full story, but enough to ignite a firestorm of cultural expectation and moral judgment. Amma's mother arrived unannounced, her sari crisp, her eyes sharp with concern and fear. She grasped Amma's shoulders, voice trembling. "You must keep silent, for your children, for your husband, for yourself. Nothing can leave this house." The elders gathered, their faces lined with years of authority, their voices low but commanding. "Separation," they said. "Shame," they murmured. Reputation, they insisted, outweighed healing, understanding, or truth. The scandal of bloodlines, even whispered, was more important than the children's well-being, more pressing than love or guilt. Kofi felt the pressure pressing in from every angle. Words like honor and propriety hung over him like storm clouds, heavy with the weight of centuries of expectation. His own mother, distant and silent, offered no comfort, only judgment masked as concern. Amma, meanwhile, moved through it all with a tight, controlled composure, her mask slipping only in private moments. She understood the stakes. The cultural machinery surrounding them would swallow her whole if she faltered. But the children, Kojo and Kwame, were already learning lessons no adult could script. They felt the tension, the unspoken fractures, the fear beneath every word. No lecture, no blessing, no traditional ritual could shield them from the truth's shadow. Reputation mattered more than healing, more than honesty, more than love for everyone except the children. And yet, in the quiet spaces of the night, the twins' small, innocent questions and the heavy, protective silence of their father were the only remnants of normalcy left in the house. Kofi looked at them, standing in the doorway after dinner, and knew one thing. He would not let the world outside define their hearts. Not yet. But the world was already closing in, relentless, merciless, and the next storm was only a matter of time. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of stillness that pressed against the skin, thick and intimate. Kofi stood before his father's grave, the polished stone cold beneath his fingertips, the engraved letters sharp in the morning sun. The scent of freshly turned earth and faint incense lingered in the air, a reminder of tradition, of duty, of lineage. He closed his eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. The doubts, the anger, the betrayal, all the questions that had plagued him since the blood test, swirled through his mind. The children's faces rose unbidden, their small hands grasping his, their laughter echoing through the halls of his memory. Finally he spoke, voice low but steady, carrying across the empty rows of graves. I raised them. I love them. What else is fatherhood? The words felt heavier than he expected, a confession and a declaration, a question and its answer entwined. For a moment, nothing moved, nothing responded, but then, slowly, the answer came from within, not from the stone beneath his hands, nor the heavens above, but from the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Fatherhood, he realized, was more than biology, more than blood. It was presence, care, guidance, love. It was the quiet constancy of showing up, of holding them when the world turned too harsh, of sacrificing for the sake of their safety and growth. That had been his choice all along, and it had not been diminished by truth. If anything, it had been defined by it. Kofi straightened, feeling the weight of years in his shoulders, the ache in his chest and a strange clarity. The choice was his to make, and he had made it every single day. The cafe was quiet, almost deliberately chosen for its neutrality, its anonymity. Kofi arrived first, hands folded over the envelope he had carried in his mind for weeks. Ethan was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, fingers steepled, eyes flicking up as Kofi entered. Neither man moved first. They regarded each other in silence, two men fractured by different sides of the same truth, burdened by choices, by guilt, by years of unseen consequences. Finally Ethan spoke, his voice low, almost tentative. I didn't know, he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every memory, every longing, every subtle absence he had lived with for years. Kofi's eyes met his, calm, measured, not accusing, not violent, but heavy with everything left unsaid. I did everything, he replied quietly. I loved them. I fed them. I held them through the night. I raised them. That is what a father is. The words hung between them like smoke in a sunbeam, filling the space with a clarity neither man had expected. Neither anger nor blame was shouted aloud. There was only acknowledgement, the raw recognition of responsibility and consequence. Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly. A man who had carried absence for too long, now confronted with presence he could not undo. Kofi's jaw tightened, not with hatred, but with quiet determination. He had chosen, he had acted, he had been their father in every sense that mattered. And in that neutral, quiet space, two broken men, one living with guilt, one with betrayal, found an understanding that words could only partly express. No violence, no revenge, just the weight of the truth, heavy and unflinching, and the recognition that some things could never be undone, only carried. The days that followed the confrontation with Ethan were quiet, reflective, almost sacred in their simplicity. Kofi spent long hours watching Kojo and Kwame, observing the way they ran, laughed, argued, and solved little disputes with tiny, serious gestures that only children could make. He felt the weight of his own reflection in their eyes, the tilt of a brow, the set of a jaw, the spark of curiosity that mirrored his own. And slowly, a truth crystallized within him, undeniable and steady. Blood begins life, but love sustains it. He remembered every sleepless night, Every fevered cheek he had kissed, every scraped knee he had bandaged, every whispered word of encouragement in the darkness. He realized that fatherhood was not a matter of biology, but of devotion. He could walk away. He could let pride dictate the terms, let betrayal dictate his actions. But he would not. He would not abandon them. Not for anger, not for betrayal, not for shame. His sons had lived their entire lives under his care, and in that care he had been a father in every way that mattered. Kofi made a silent vow that morning as the sunlight spilled across their breakfast table. He would continue to be their father, their protector, their anchor, and he would do it with a clarity and resolve that neither truth nor deception could diminish. Amma's presence in the house became quieter, more deliberate, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension and would no longer tolerate the pretense of intimacy. The quiet, once comforting, had turned brittle, sharp. Kofi and Amma separated, not with yelling, not with slamming doors, but quietly, almost ritualistically. They divided rooms, belongings, routines. Their love had been real, but it had been marred, and forgiveness did not demand continuation. Forgiveness, Kofi realized, had its own dignity. It did not require living under the same roof or pretending the past had never happened. It simply demanded acknowledgement, acceptance, and a measured release. Amma understood this too. Her departure was orderly and calm, respectful, a reflection of the careful control she had always exerted over her life. They did not part with hatred, but with a profound awareness that some consequences could not be undone, and some mistakes could only be honored by living apart. In the emptiness that followed, Kofi found focus. His heart was heavy, but it carried a singular, unshakable truth. He would remain unwavering for the children. One evening, after dinner, Kofi called the boys into the living room. Kojo and Kwame climbed onto the sofa, eyes bright, expecting a story or a game, unaware that the moment carried the weight of revelation. Kofi sat between them, taking their small hands in his. He spoke slowly, gently, carefully, choosing words that would explain love, truth, and responsibility without shattering their sense of home. "Boys," he began, voice steady, "there's something I need to tell you. Some things about our family, about how you came to be." The twins listened, rapt and still, their eyes wide with curiosity and trust. Kofi told them enough to be honest, but not enough to burden them with adult guilt or shame. He spoke of love and choices, of mistakes and forgiveness, of the fact that the people who loved you are not always defined by blood alone. When he finished, there was silence. Then Kojo, voice small but certain, said, "You're still our dad." Kwame nodded, resting his head against Kofi's shoulder, murmuring, "Yeah, you're still our dad." It was enough. It was more than enough. In that moment, Kofi felt the ache of betrayal soften into a quiet, enduring joy. Fatherhood was not erased by truth or lies. It was lived in laughter, in guidance, in presence, and in love that had been tested and had endured. He hugged them both tightly, inhaling the small, familiar sense of childhood, the faint traces of sweat, soap, and the unrepeatable essence of innocence. In that embrace he understood fully. The bond he had forged could not be broken. Not by biology, not by secrets, not by the world. The house was quieter now, yes, and the family had changed. But the essence of fatherhood, what truly mattered, remained unshaken, alive and steadfast in the hearts of those who had lived it. Life did not return to what it had been. It reshaped itself, slowly, deliberately, into something quieter, truer. Amma left first, not in disgrace, not chased away by whispers, but with the careful resolve of a woman who understood that reinvention was the only form of survival left to her. She moved into a smaller apartment across the city, one that held no echoes of lies. She returned to school part-time, volunteered quietly, and learned, painfully, how to exist without applause or performance. She did not ask for forgiveness again. She accepted its limits. Ethan left the country within months. His decision was swift and final, a recognition that presence would only complicate wounds that had already scarred. He sent one letter to Kofi, not Amma. It contained no requests, no claims, only acknowledgement. I will carry this knowing I exist because you chose to love where I failed to know. Kofi never replied. He didn't need to. Some closures did not require conversation, only acceptance. Kofi rebuilt his home not with new walls, but with new rules. Honesty replaced tradition where tradition demanded silence. Questions were allowed, feelings were named, love was spoken aloud, often and without embarrassment. The house changed its rhythm. It became lighter, truer, and in that truth, something healed. The graduation hall buzzed with excitement, parents shifting in their seats, phones raised, names echoing over speakers. Kojo and Kwame stood together at the edge of adulthood. Taller now, broader in the shoulders, their laughter deeper, more restrained. Kofi watched them from the front row, his chest full in a way no title or recognition had ever managed to fill. He remembered them as babies wrapped in cloth, as boys clutching his fingers, as teenagers testing boundaries. Every version of them lived inside him. When their names were called, they crossed the stage with confidence. Kojo scanned the crowd first and found him instantly. Ngwami followed, eyes locking with Kofi's, a smile breaking across his face. Kofi rose to his feet without thinking. The applause blurred, his vision softened. Later, in the restroom hallway, Kofi caught his reflection in the mirror. Older now, lines etched by grief and grace alike. And for the first time in years, the mirror did not ask questions. It did not accuse. It did not confuse. He knew exactly who he was. Blood had made them related, but love, chosen, tested, and sustained, had made them family. And that truth, once unseen, now stood unshakable.